Let me take you on a journey to meet the places that bring us together and all those who design them. Let us explore the profound changes that lead us to reimagine the purpose, operations, and organization of commercial real estate. To do so, we will meet all those who make them, without exception, from design to operations, from the architect to property managers, from FMers to service providers, from occupiers to PropTech startups, to imagine what the spaces of tomorrow will look like. Spaces that make sense economically, operationally, and humanly. To understand together the new dimensions of spaces that at last look like us. Welcome to the Spacecraft. Let's discover the spaces of tomorrow with all those who crack them. 3, 2, 1, ignition. For this very first episode in English, I'm delighted to be with Freddie Pritchard Smith, co-founder of Trustek, a London-based company specialized in buildings technology audit. With a position right at the heart of the built world, Freddie discusses on a daily basis with all the key stakeholders of this ecosystem, providing him with a unique perspective on where their tech needs meet. This led him recently to organize workshops and a soon-to-come event about smart buildings with one central question. What is a smart building? And most importantly, how to make it work for everyone. The Spacecraft Season 1, Episode 5. Let's go. So, hello and welcome to the Spacecraft. So, the podcast that basically talks about everything about the built world and all its stakeholders. And today I'm very lucky to be with Freddie Pritchard Smith. Hello, Freddie.
Hello. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good, really good, and really happy to be there with you today because you're organizing an event about. Basically, what is a smart building? And that is really the talking point I wanted to have with you. But before jumping into that, maybe could you introduce yourself and your company and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm the co-founder of a digital building consultancy business called Trustek. We founded the company 2 years ago, really to try and bridge the gap between property technologies available in the marketplace and the real estate built environment. With more than 10,000 property technology solutions available in the marketplace, we really understood how difficult it is for the real estate market to actually understand, select and deploy the right solutions into their buildings to make sure that the products that they bought will give them the outcomes they need. And we get to work with some fantastic developers and operators of buildings, as well as occupiers. So really the fortunate position that we sit in is that we don't have a product to sell, it's a service. And we get to kind of ask difficult questions of our clients to say, what is it you actually want from a smart building? And from tenant technology side is, what actually can your product do today as opposed to what's in your roadmap? And our piece of the puzzle is to kind of hopefully match the problem with the solution and actually make sure the people that are using it understand how to use it and how to get the best out of it.
Okay, pretty clear. I guess you're in a lucky position because you're right in the middle of a whole ecosystem of different stakeholders that most often don't talk that much to each other. And I think that's kind of the point of your event, so to say, about smart building, is making all these people needs match and find a common ground. Can you tell us more about what you're trying to achieve there?
Yeah, so we decided to run our own event because the events that we've been to quite often are done in silos. So there'll be a property technology event that's full of technology businesses. There'll be a landlord event that's full of landlords. And there'll also then be occupier or HR or workplace events. And we see all too often that there would be a panel talking about one of the stakeholders without one of the stakeholders present. So really what we've done is actually run individual workshops with each of the stakeholders. So the owners of the building, the operators of the building, the technology company themselves, but also the occupiers, because ultimately they're the end customer, the user, the goal, the most valuable part of any asset is the people that work in those buildings. And quite often we've seen that the needs aren't always aligned. The assumptions of what they want aren't actually being discussed, or if they are being discussed, it's not being challenged by the people that are actually the ones using it. So it's been a fascinating build up to our actual event. So doing these workshops, we've actually just finished one today with the property manager side of it. And really what we're trying to get to the bottom of is there's so much options and possibilities when it comes to smart technologies, and actually are what they all want actually aligned, or is it misaligned? And so the opportunity for our event is to kind of create a Venn diagram with the things that are most important to those individual stakeholders, but then really critically, what are the things they're overlapping on? And that's the things that we want to hopefully communicate to all of them, to go, this is where you're all pulling in the same direction. So when it comes to thinking about what you need in a smart building, this is the list of things to start with, and hopefully to say these are the ones you should probably ignore or leave to a tomorrow problem.
It's fun that you talk about the one that you'd probably ignore, because one of the challenges, or actually one of the reality I see talking with people about smart buildings, is that a lot of the initiatives have actually a lot of difficulties driving engagement by the end users, the occupiers most of the time. Why is that? Why is engaging with the technology that we put in buildings so difficult, and where is the mismatch there?
I think it's a very difficult question to answer. I think the role that the building plays in the workplace is sort of an enabler, and ultimately businesses have their own internal challenges and issues around the operational performance and what they're doing as a core business. And for many industries, that's got nothing to do with real estate. So when you're trying to get a business or individuals to engage in the building, us working in the industry love it, understand it, get excited about it. But actually for your average company that has, real estate is sort of a means to an end for them. And the role of the office is one of the biggest debated topics going at the moment. So trying to get a person to engage in a built space when actually it's got nothing to do with their day job, their passion, their interests, but actually from the echo chamber of real estate, we think this is the most important thing and this should be really relevant to them. I think there's that slight disconnect, and that's really where we're trying to actually go and ask people, what are the things you really need from a building that we can give to you, be it in a digital experience or just anything else. And it's all too often the questions aren't being asked to those end stakeholders. It's a decision that's made without them and then forced upon them. And behavioural change and something new in existing buildings is always a real challenge. And especially with all these products, there's a cost associated in a world where everything is getting more expensive and more challenging for businesses. Trying to say we've decided to implement this thing without asking you, and it's going to cost you more money. It's a pretty challenging starting place for any deployment.
Yeah, lots of very interesting topics there. I hear that basically it's difficult sometimes to have the end users included in the discussion, and that's a great thing that you do the initiatives you're doing. I know the event, the actual one is on April the 19th, if I am correct. Can you those needs through all the workshops that you did, can you give us a quick glimpse about exactly what you found out and what are the core needs of the users and the other?
Don't want to spoil it too much, but I think there is the consistency throughout a lot of the conversations is focused around communication and transparency between the different stakeholders to understand kind of what each of them are doing. So whether that's number of people, total energy consumption, total carbon generated, costs associated, there's definitely a need for more transparency between the process of sort of, it feels like a little bit of a dark art when it comes to operational technology in buildings, and there's a level of education that needs to occur with both the people in the building, the operators, the property managers, but also with the occupiers. So it's sort of going, you've never asked us for this solution, but here's why it's beneficial to you. I think one of the really interesting facets that we've not uncovered, but we sort of predicted might happen, is that there's a huge pressure put on the property management teams in these buildings to be the ones that not only find and suggest the technologies, but then also will implement them, deploy them, sustain them, engage with the occupiers. And there's a lot of pressure on these individuals that ultimately in their skill set of what they do as a property manager, technology, data reporting, software analytics is not part of the job role. And it's a new role that's been given to them. So there's definitely, I think, a little bit of a gap in what that person looks like in a building and what their roles and responsibilities are as more technology becomes commonplace. So I would say, as a bit of a summary, there's a huge assumption that somebody's doing something without anyone actually taking the accountability for it or having the autonomy to get on and do stuff, which in itself kind of creates this inertia of not a lot of things happening. It's a very sweeping statement.
Yeah, I can only guess so. And in your opinion, how to organize? Is it a new role to be created to implement technology within buildings, or is it like organizing more communication to organize this continuity between those who build, those we manage, and those who operate, and those who actually use it? Because I can see, I can sense a lack of continuity in the transmission of the data and the needs that create this kind of mismatch between the different users.
Yeah, I think there's definitely that's really needed. I think it's even interesting in the construction and an operational perspective of buildings that the construction team's role within that building finishes at practical completion, and then it's handed over to a property management team who have to essentially learn from day dot what's in the building, how's it working. There's definitely new things coming in, so the operational performance of the construction being tied to the operational. So neighbours accreditations on energy as an example of post-completion having to track the data consumption for 2 years afterwards to hold that accountability piece. But because a lot of developments, especially in the UK, are speculatively built, so they're built without an end user involved. So you're trying to make assumptions about what a hypothetical business is going to need. So I think it's easy when you've got one occupier that you can sit down and have this discussion of what do you really need and how are we going to implement it and what we're going to do together. When you're sort of building a building in silo from a construction perspective, giving it to a property manager to learn, and they haven't had any influence and knowledge over, one person might be looking after 3 or 4 buildings, and then every one of those 4 buildings will have a different piece of technology that runs it. So they're learning how to use how to work that asset, and then you enter into a tenant comes into the mix, and they might have their own corporate products and services and things they do that may or may not integrate, may or may not be aligned to it. So in the perfect world, you would have this holistic conversation between all stakeholders, but in reality, often if there's an existing or a new building, if you don't have that, you have to sort of make sure that there's the availability in plain English as well. No acronyms required, to say this is what's here, this is how it works, this is what we can do for you and what you can get from us as a building management team or as a software team. So that's what we see as kind of the challenge or the benchmark of doing it really well. Okay,
really interesting. I'm thinking about another topic there. So basically, I think you are well placed to see that PropTechs are actually giving a lot of solution for a lot of different kind of issues within buildings, whether it's about user experience, space usage, or more ESG related topics. So I get 2 questions there. The first one would be, what are the key topics that are actually being discussed? Because I've been seeing a lot about space usage and how to optimize it, but obviously there's a lot about ESG too, concerns. And the second part of the question, you mentioned the cost part of it, but what should be the ROI of these technologies? I mean, especially when you talk about user experience, for example, how do you actually see any ROI in there? How do you measure that? Is it even possible?
Yeah, so to start with the first question, I think it's a really interesting thing around utilization, and if we're talking about ESG, but sort of focusing more on the energy side of buildings, the environment side of it, from an operational perspective, that again, this is this disconnect between what the landlord can offer to an occupier and what is the occupier's responsibility, because once they cross that line between the common parts of their own demise, that data that's available to them and what they can use and how they use it to manage their workplace, there's still this siloed process. So there are definitely a handful of buildings now that are putting in sensors to capture utilization and then giving the data back to an occupier. But with GDPR, with corporate logistics about going, are you tracking me? I don't like being tracked, whether it's key passes, whether it's under desk sensors, corporately there can be a big challenge around the validation or need for that level of granular data to say, actually, how are we utilizing our space? We always sort of say to people that your key cards are always probably the best and cheapest way to look at roughly how many people are coming into the building, whether it's just generalized as opposed to a total number, not Freddie turned up to the building 10 minutes late again and left 5 minutes early, but actually more of a total population level to go, okay, actually, if we've got 3 floors, how many people are coming and going on each floor? Therefore, can we turn these things off? And or looking at your booking software, so your calendar links, how many meetings have we had? Those kind of things. There's a lot of easy data wins to help people work out that workplace. How that should, but doesn't always link, is into the sustainability optimization of a building. In theory, all buildings should be on demand. If no one is there, they should be turned off. It seems very obvious, whether it's a PRR sensor like motion detection, turning a light off, or whether it's heating and cooling a space. If one person walks onto a floor plate, will that trigger the entire floor being turned on and all of the heating and ventilation being coming on? That is a terrible, terrible waste of energy and carbon. And when 28% of the 40% of our carbon emissions from real estate comes from operational carbon, we see the link between how much workspace do I need is an important real estate decision from a business side, but actually the simple things that you should be giving this data flow between tenant and manager, managing agent or landlord, is going, we're not here, or if no one's here, please turn off this floor for us. And we've seen some really great examples of people using these data points to say, look, we've actually noticed that on a Friday, there's only 3 floors here. Do you mind if we turn these other floors off? Or do you mind if we turn it off an hour earlier because people are leaving earlier? So it is happening, but it's when it comes to the connecting those two things, the data flow between the stakeholders isn't clear enough, because the tenant often has the data themselves and the landlord doesn't always have the data. So it has to be a shared commonality between hopefully what is the same goal, which is to have a net zero building or have a more sustainable building that people want to get into, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, does absolutely make sense. And it makes me wonder also, do you see 2 things? First, it's like a new initiative trying to actually bring up the data in the operations of the building to be able to do this kind of savings and achieve these ESG objectives. Sometimes you see people letting you think that you can have this real-time data. Where do you think we sit on that? I mean, are we still at a moment where we need to have the human treatment and gather a lot of data to be able to actually make decisions? As you mentioned, like you see that on Friday and Thursday not a lot of people are coming, or do you see the age of real-time usage and real-time services already there, or is it a myth it's something coming for the years to come? Not sure I'm clear.
It's definitely not. It's definitely not a myth. There are definitely products out there that are working or that currently are available for people to implement that will allow the building to be turned into an on-demand building. So the concept of real-time data and data in general, there can sometimes be too much data for a person to process. And really, when we're working with clients to define what they want, it's really important that it sort of go, we really need this data. And we always go, if I gave you the perfect data set for that, what would you do with it? And all too often they can't answer that question. I was like, I'm pretty sure you don't need that data then. It's because you can get really, very, very minutiae data on every light fitting, every single plug, everything in the building. And it's a huge massive transparency, really granular information, but do you have the expertise? Do you have the KPIs? Do you have the reasons of why you're collecting it before you go out and get it? Because having it is one thing, but as everyone says, and all the images around data is that people don't want data, they want outcomes. They want solutions. They want to be told what to do and how to do it. And the automation of those things and automation in general is going in that direction. So a lot of products we call show and tell. I'll show you the problem, but I won't tell you necessarily what to do about it, which then creates more work for people to actually sift through all this information to give themselves a clear outcome of what they should do next. So we're seeing a trend towards these more AI or machine learning, always worried about saying AI, a lot of things, but machine learning to actually say, here is our defined set points at this time. If no one's here or nothing is detected, then execute this thing, which is maybe a light or a heating turn off. And I appreciate I didn't answer your second question, which was about cost and experience.
Yeah, exactly.
I was trying to avoid
How do you measure that?
So within ESG, social value is a huge part of it, and I think that the real estate market has a huge role to play in actually engaging local communities and quantifying how much value, especially with the debate around the future of the office space, what people in buildings bring to cities and what other things that people could interact with these built spaces should be doing to support the local area. So whether it's affordable workspaces, whether it's getting a school to come in and learn about facilities management or BMSs, there's a huge amount that can be done, I think, more in social value than necessarily just focusing on the E. But I think when it comes to customer experience and how you quantify it, and there's no ROI like an energy saving, but actually a huge part of the GRESB reporting is a tenant satisfaction surveys. So a very simple survey that won't be completed by 100%. If you get 10%, then that's probably a good starting place. But we always, again, would say to someone, we want to implement a technology to improve our customer experience. If they don't know what it is today, then how are they ever going to be able to prove that putting a technology in has improved it? So a baseline of a survey around the net promoter score or something similar that can say, would you recommend this building to another business or a friend, is where we'd say the baseline. And then whatever you do next, you can then come back to report it. Kind of going back to what I said earlier, that transparency, right? If I'm in a building and the net promoter scores keep going up and up and up, or down and down and down, the transparency of going, hey, we've done this for you and this is the outcome, it makes that whole buying process and the cost, when there's not a tangible ROI on it, an easier thing to convince a person to do.
Interesting. There's a kind of a trend, not a trend, but the workplace management used to be heavily linked to the purchasing department. So with clear KPIs that were linked to the costs. It seems that there is like something going towards more human resources where you can actually see KPIs more related to, I don't know, turnover of people, your brand as a company, how you get the best talents. And it is interesting to see the workplace and all kind of spaces tends to have this new KPI and going into this direction.
Well, I think ultimately for all businesses, their people are the biggest cost, and when individuals coming into the workplace are choosing a business on their sustainability levels or credentials or their ambitions, and people changing roles to go to more sustainable companies, that experience, the sustainability, the transparency of what they're doing as a business, and the experience is a deciding factor between someone choosing to go and work for one company or another. And losing people, wellness and well-being has been a huge catalyst for that as well. And I'm still amazed how few buildings in the UK have indoor air quality sensors and transparent air quality sensors, given the really clear impact on CO2 on productivity, of high CO2 having an adverse impact on your decision making, but it's still not a mandatory thing that is available, that's not in every building. And when you ask an occupier, why don't you have it? It's often the fear is it will be bad and we can't do anything about it, as opposed to, ignorance shouldn't really be bliss when it comes to productivity and health and well-being.
And a question about this, it tends sometimes, I've been hearing before the occupiers, especially in the workplace, everybody was obliged to go there. there was no remote working. You didn't have the chance, since you can work remote, basically you can change company more often. So there is kind of a tension on the retention of talents, and they have more powers now. The occupiers have more power, and it seems that they can impose, or they can actually decide exactly what is the most important thing their building should do for them. Did you have the chance to actually talk with occupiers, and if so, what are the key things they ask from the building they work in?
Yeah, kind of two ends of the spectrum really from that. And again, the lens is caveated by talking to the facilities and operationals teams, not the CEO, the FD, and the head of HR that might probably have very different needs. So I think it's always important when you qualify a statement of where that source of information's come from. So it's from the facilities teams that are the operational engine room for a company. And the very, very simple thing that we've heard of is not necessarily the experience as the priority number one. It is, I need to have accurate, consistent data on our energy, water and gas consumption that I can see at any time, anywhere, so I can report it internally. So we can do our own internal reporting and benchmarking. That was one of the critical things that we've seen most consistently spoken about in tenant meetings we've been privy to.
Okay, yeah, so that's no surprise. I mean, giving the impact on the costs. One other thing that has a large, especially when you're talking about large buildings, but a major impact on the costs is all the, I'm not sure, but the operational costs linked to the services, the way the building is actually serviced. So I'm talking there about security, I'm talking about cleaning, I'm talking about all the people basically who provide all kind of services, facility management related services. Do you see ways of optimization there through technology? Because we were just, when you're talking energy consumption, gas, electricity and so on, it's cables, you can have sensors, you can basically measure and have very specific metrics. When you talk about people operating in your office, do you see ways to actually optimize that and use tech to optimize so?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the product that you guys are selling, I think we're very big fans of because of the transparency and the accountability of being able to make sure that it's being done. I think we've seen examples of the subcontracting nature of building operations, making it very hard to have quality control over it, about when a person comes, what they achieve, and there's lots of softwares out there to track that process. But I think there are definitely better ways there are definitely technologies available to implement and optimize those solutions to make sure that when a process is being done, that it's being recorded. And when it comes to that repair replace decision on a building, you can go actually looking back at the data. We've had to repair this 4 times this year, which has cost us X amount, to actually know what the right thing to do is to replace it. And a word that is missing from all too many agreements from a subcontractor perspective would be optimize. So it's a maintain. So if I get to a building and there are no issues with it, my maintenance has been satisfied. I've done my job. There's no red flags. The red flags have been resolved, and off I go. Those experts, those knowledge, those people that come to it, if they thought about actually, could I optimize the building? Could I change something? Could I improve it? They're very time short, and actually really it should be a clear KPI for anyone working in a building, be it in cleaning, be it in the M&E, that part of their accountability for working there is going, actually, you know what, I've been to this floor 3 times to clean it and it's always absolutely pristine. I walk in, look around and walk out. So why am I going to this floor every time? Can I not optimize this and think, actually, you know what, we'll put a sensor in to understand when it gets to 10 people, then I'll go there and clean it. Cleaning on demand, not just turning up to a building and doing the same thing that you've always done on a rota. So I think those things from an insight operational perspective can help people perform better than just sort of doing what they've always done.
Yeah, and I hear you talking about sensors. Make me think about another question I would like to ask you, and maybe it's something that you had doing your workshops. Are there concerns or interest about the idea of retrofitting? I don't know if the words is the same, but basically, the cost associated with trying to implement this new technology? Because I can feel there is a search for it. There is a lot of attention to that. But does it actually work with the built world that it is today? And do you see solutions to actually make that available for the vast majority of the buildings that are still there for the next 10 to 20 years? And not just the new buildings?
Yeah, well, I think the statistic that 80% of the buildings that need to be net zero by 2050 are already built. So that is the existing stock is the biggest challenge. I think around sensor deployment, it's a very interesting one because the price of sensors is coming down. The availability of sensors is growing daily. So we'd always say that if something feels expensive, make sure you get at least 2 or 3 quotes. And that's what we do in procurement to go, actually, is there another way that we can extract the same data from a sensor, but at a lower cost? So if one requires cabling that's going to have an IT infrastructure and having to have big holes, but actually another one is more of a battery powered solution that's potentially going to mean you have to replace the batteries every 4 years, but ultimately the capital cost goes down. So I think there are solutions out there. I think the prices are coming down. I think ultimately one of the big challenges around a lot of the deployment is kind of twofold. One is the asset owner's plan for that building. So am I going to own this asset for 3, 5, 10, 15 years, or am I going to trade out of the asset? Therefore, this ROI experience, will I get the benefit of it, or will it be passed on to the next person? Therefore, it's their problem, not mine. So would I implement it? And in many ways, the occupier lease length, going from what was the old school 25-year lease down to 10 to 5 to 3 to shorter. Again, okay, I'm investing in this real estate, but I might not be here because I'm a scale or fail SME. So I'm going to need double the space next year. So actually, can I justify investing more of my working capital into sensors to benefit me over such a short space of time? So kind of those two things in itself often make this inertia of doing something, because it's sort of, is it part of the wider business plan, be it for the building or for the business? So, but I suppose our mindset is always something is better than nothing. Do a pilot on one floor, on one bathroom, on one space, on one thing. See what happens. Test it. It might not work. It might fail. Yeah, trying to find the silver bullet that's going to solve every problem and do everything. It doesn't exist. And if it does exist, it's probably too prohibitively expensive to make it worthwhile. So, but we always say something is better than nothing. So
yeah, and it's interesting because buildings are. It's like they run like softwares mostly. Before it was like they're built in a certain way, and therefore the next 20, 25, 50 years to come, and it won't change. It will just be demolished, and a new thing will appear. Now it seems like there are iterations, pilots, test and learn, new processes that directly come from the tech way of actually releasing products and improving over time, as you mentioned, with small pilots here and there, just to improve and maybe deploy on a larger scale. So it's interesting to see that we think about places in a more flexible way, in a more agile way, I would say, where those people in charge of running those places needs also to have this new skill set of test and learn and deploying tech within the buildings. Interesting to see.
Yeah, and I think there's a role that real estate has to play in leading that discussion around technology with people. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is that, as a business that might be a fintech or a banking or a software developer, their inherent knowledge experience is nothing to do with the built environment. And that's where we see the winners when it comes to the landlords and the operators will be the ones that can go, look, I know you're going to be here for 2 years, but we're going to run this thing for you, and actually here's your air quality sensor, here's your sensor data, here's the energy data, we're going to optimize it. When you change, we're going to come back and proactively asset manage you, and this is part of our green lease to make you more sustainable, and we're just going to take care of this for you. I think that's sometimes it's sort of, you don't want to take a problem to a tenant that they haven't come to you to ask for the solution, whereas I sort of feel like the onus should be on the experts to take the solution to the people that in their daily lives, they don't ever think it's a problem because it doesn't affect their business and their operations. So I think the accountability definitely sits with the real estate side of the technology fence to go, actually, look, we've got this thing, we want to do it, it's going to be beneficial. And as opposed to waiting for the occupier to go, where's my energy data? And it's like, I don't know.
And maybe one last question I have is about operated offices, operated spaces in more global because knowing that those buildings now have this new paradigm, this new dimensions, I would say, to measure, it's almost like a new job to actually run them because it requires to be able to monitor all this data. It's almost like a new night no work. So that sometimes the real estate directions don't know how to do because their job was not the same. As you mentioned, they were like managing leases for 25 years or 10 years even.
Yeah.
And now we are narrowing that down to the shortest amount of time possible. So knowing that it's difficult to actually invest in such technologies with a short-term lease, I don't know what to say. Does it make sense to say that maybe the future is going toward like a smart building as a service created by operated places that you would just go and have everything running and you just get the outcome, the data and the satisfaction of the users? Do you see the market going this way or most of the portfolio going this way? Tough question.
I would think it would be it's a great question. It's a great concept and one that I think I would love to see be a reality for a lot of people. I think it would be very interesting to do that. I suppose where I'm always about with a lot of things in technology, it's always the future and this hypothetical scenario. And I think we always like to keep on we're all about the practical application of these things. So like what's being done today? And what's being done today that I really like the look of is most buildings, when they're being refurbished, they will have a base build category A specification, so floor, lighting, heating, cooling. And now there's a trend because of the sustainability push to no longer put in those base builds, so they're delivering it to shell and core, so an empty shell, a blank canvas, to the most extreme example, which is a hard thing for a person to visualize what it will look like, which has an impact on the leasing, but if you stay with me on this one. But so we're seeing that these buildings now being finished are not being finished with all the lights in, with all the heating and ventilation in, they're being finished just as a shell, like a retail often take. And then what we're seeing now is the opportunity, you can have it as a blank canvas, and you can tell us where to put these things. So we're not putting up a light fitting and then 2 weeks later we're moving it. We're not putting in a ceiling tile and then throwing it away straight away. It's, we'll deliver it to what you need and there's no waste or less waste, and we're doing that. And then that's like an option one. Option two is we will actually lay it out, put the furniture in, the meeting rooms, the AV, the Wi-Fi, the whole managed service of the physical fitted space. We'll manage that for you and we'll deliver it for you. And then the one on top of that is the sort of the bit that you were talking about is we'll deliver the whole thing. And here is the software bundle of things that we'll put into your building to monitor everything you're doing, to optimize it for you. And we will share that data with you to make sure that, you never waste energy, you've got great air quality, perfect Wi-Fi speed. We'll manage that whole thing for you. So that's what we're seeing being done today, is you basically go in there and choose exactly how far you want it to go. And there's different price points for 1, 2, and 3. So that's what we see as being, hopefully more of the future of less wasted Cat A, but also the options being presented as here is a tick box of what you can have. We've already procured it. We know it's going to work. Let us know and it'll be ready for you when you come in on X date.
That's great. And I love this idea of empty shell because it makes me think that smart building, often you just straight away think about data, think about tech. But maybe one of the smartest things you can do about a building is like making it adaptable, where you can change things that are not just like sealed in the mortar like forever and ever. It's just like the smartest thing you can do is not just about the tech, it's about the mix of the tech and the way it's built in itself to change over time and to adapt to its users. And so I like this piece of thinking.
we're excited to see, whether it's solar battery, whether it's internal farming, whether it's storage, whether it's life sciencing and laboratories. The utilization of what is a traditional office, I think, will definitely change over time with the need for physical desk space evolving. So I'm excited to see how these buildings can be adapted to serve different purposes.
Yeah, and that's great to see that your offices used to be like lines of desks and monitors aligned. There's no need for that because you can obviously do that at home. So, and it's exciting that you mentioned like farms, you mentioned other things, because it's not going to be at the center of places where people actually live, and not just they can shop, they can eat, they can work, they can do other things. And that's a great perspective for the future, and maybe another occasion to talk on another podcast, because we're nearing to the end. So thanks a lot for all the thoughts you shared with us today. That's really, really great. And I'm looking forward actually the event and the outcomes of the workshops you conducted to learn more from all these stakeholders, because it's a great idea. Really, you had to put them together and to really see what are their own insights, and really looking into finding out where their interests intersect. As you mentioned, the Venn diagram. Looking forward to that, definitely.
Yeah, we'll definitely share it with you. It's something that hopefully we can start to run on an annual basis and kind of expand the group to make sure we're capturing a wide enough perspective. It's not still in the little the echo chamber of things. But no, we're really excited about it. And as I say, a lot of this is transparency and sharing. So we'll be sharing it with everyone. It's not something that we're going to keep personal to us to leverage against other people. It's how can we help the industry move forward in the right direction.
That's great. Transparency and continuity. I think we're aligned. Thanks a lot, Freddie, for being with us today.
No worries. Thanks, Julian.
Thanks a lot, and speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Speak to you soon. Take care. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the 5th episode of The Spacecraft, your weekly podcast about all the new dimensions of your buildings. If you like this episode and would like to make sure not to miss the next ones, subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. The Spacecraft is available on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Amazon Music, Spotify, and Deezer. See you next week for the 6th episode of The Spacecraft.